Welcome to the University of Texas at San Antonio Orientation Vodcast for Cooperating Teachers. Thank you for your willingness to work with a clinical teacher from UTSA. We appreciate your help and support. We could not have a teacher preparation program if you were not willing to assume the responsibility of having a clinical teacher. The Texas Administrative Code has defined the role of a cooperating teacher. The cooperating teacher is expected to guide, assist, and support the clinical teacher in areas such as planning, classroom management, instruction, assessment, working with parents, obtaining materials, and understanding school district policies. The cooperating teacher is also expected to report the clinical teacher's progress to the university field supervisor. You have been selected by your school district to be a cooperating teacher because of your willingness to take on the responsibility of sharing your skills, your talents, and your wisdom about teaching with your clinical teacher. We recognize that this is an additional obligation to add to your already full schedule. Thank you again for your willingness to take on this role. Please review this short Cooperating Teacher Orientation Vodcast for an overview of the clinical teaching semester. Further details of the semester may be found in the Clinical Teacher Cooperating Teacher Handbook located on the UTSA College of Education and Human Development Clinical Teaching website. The calendar for clinical teachers is one of gradual induction to the classroom. The first few days of the semester are spent at UTSA in professional meetings, and clinical teachers begin in their placements during the second week of the semester. A few days before clinical teachers arrive in their classrooms, cooperating teachers will receive a letter or email from the university field supervisor. The letter or email will give the name of the clinical teacher, the date the clinical teacher will arrive on the school campus, and contact information for the university supervisor. A few days before clinical teachers arrive in their classrooms, cooperating teachers will electronically receive a multimedia autobiography of their clinical teacher, titled My Story. Please review the My Story autobiography in order to become better acquainted with your clinical teacher. At the beginning of the placement, clinical teachers observe in the classroom and take notes of the teaching, behavior management procedures, and other classroom routines. During this initial week or so, the clinical teacher learns the names of the students and begins to get an idea of how the classroom works. Cooperating teachers can help this process by providing a space for the clinical teacher to work and by pointing out specific routines and expectations that the cooperating teacher has for his or her students. At this early point in the placement, it's best to establish a specific weekly communication time, say every Tuesday after school or every Friday before school starts, when the cooperating teacher and clinical teacher can meet to discuss upcoming sessions, issues with students, or questions about classroom procedures. During the first days in the classroom, the cooperating teacher may have the clinical teacher read to the class or work with small groups of students. Other projects may be assigned to the clinical teacher to help him or her begin to feel comfortable in the classroom and with the students. The clinical teacher may also observe other teachers and classrooms during this time. Following the introductory few days, the clinical teacher will gradually begin to assume responsibility for planning and teaching lessons. Depending on the grade level or subject, this may be accomplished in a variety of ways. For clinical teachers in elementary settings, the usual procedure is to pick up a subject area, such as math or science or social studies, every week or every other week until all subject areas are being taught by the clinical teacher. Once the clinical teacher is planning and teaching all subject areas, the full teach or full responsibility portion of clinical teaching has begun. For elementary clinical teachers, full teach should not occur before approximately week 10. The full teach portion of clinical teaching should last around 15 consecutive days. During full teach, The cooperating teacher should be available to support and assist the clinical teacher as needed, but should try to leave all responsibilities to the clinical teacher. The goal of Full Teach is to give the clinical teacher a view of teaching that is as realistic as possible. Clinical teachers in middle or high schools assume responsibilities a little differently. Those clinical teachers will take on different class periods of the day as their areas. They may assume responsibility for, say, first period for a week, and then add second period, then add third period, and so forth, until responsibility for teaching all periods of the day has been assumed. Full Teach for middle and high school clinical teachers may occur for as long as an entire grading period or for only 3 weeks, whichever seems appropriate to the setting, to the cooperating teacher, and to the clinical teacher. There are various ways for middle and high school cooperating teachers to begin to share the teaching responsibilities with the clinical teacher. For example, the clinical teacher may teach the lesson during first period to model how the lesson should be taught, and then the clinical teacher may teach the lesson during second period. The cooperating teacher could teach again during third period, and the clinical teacher may teach again during fourth period, and so on. Or the cooperating teacher may teach the first part of the lesson, and then turn the teaching over to the clinical teacher to continue. Or the cooperating teacher may decide to take back a subject area or class period for a while to let the clinical teacher further observe successful teaching. Regardless of grade level or subject area, cooperating teachers are strongly encouraged to step back in and co-teach with their clinical teacher at any time. Cooperating teachers should not hesitate to take back a subject area or class period if they feel their students would be better served by having the clinical teacher observe successful teaching for a few additional days. Clinical teachers are in the process of becoming professional educators. During the semester, they may occasionally return to the UTSA campus for professional development. Clinical teachers are expected to be in attendance at the professional development sessions. If they are scheduled to teach during the time they will be away from the school campus, clinical teachers should leave lesson plans and materials for their cooperating teachers to use during their absence. Evaluation of the clinical teacher is one of the cooperating teacher's most important responsibilities. Evaluations are 2 types, informal and formal. Informal observations should be casual, frequent, and ongoing. The cooperating teacher simply observes the clinical teacher while he or she is teaching, keeps notes of what is observed, and then shares those notes with the clinical teacher. The clinical teacher will use those written notes to help guide improvement of his or her skills. Formal observations are always scheduled with the clinical teacher. Prior to every formal observation, a pre-observation conference should occur. A day or 2 before the formal observation, the cooperating teacher and clinical teacher should discuss objectives for the observed lesson, materials that may be needed, activities that will occur during the lesson, and expectations for the students during the lesson. The clinical teacher may decide to adjust the planned lesson following the pre-observation conference. In a dual placement situation, each cooperating teacher should schedule 2 formal observations with the clinical teacher. In a single placement situation, the cooperating teacher should schedule 3 formal observations. The cooperating teacher may decide to take notes during the observation and then complete the C-test observation form that is included in the cooperating teacher packet. As soon as possible after the formal observation, the cooperating teacher and clinical teacher should sit down together to review the lesson, discuss the strengths as noted on the C-test form, and discuss areas for growth, also noted on the C-test form. At the conclusion of the meeting, both the cooperating teacher and clinical teacher should sign the form. The original form should be delivered to the university supervisor. The clinical teacher keeps a copy of the form and may make a copy for the cooperating teacher. The original will be kept in the clinical teacher's file at UTSA. The ongoing checklist is a form that is located in the cooperating teacher folder. This form may be completed by the cooperating teacher before each observation visit by the university supervisor. The form is useful for noting issues or areas for growth that should be addressed with the clinical teacher by the university supervisor. Of course, the ongoing checklist may also be used to note positive examples of the clinical teacher's growth. The midway report is completed at the halfway point of the placement. The midway report is a progress report that may be used to identify the strengths of the clinical teacher. The form may also be used to identify areas the clinical teacher should improve upon during the second part of the placement. The cooperating teacher and university supervisor each complete a midway report, and each should share their midway report with the clinical teacher. At the end of the clinical teaching placement, the cooperating teacher and university supervisor each complete a summative C-test form. The summative form should reflect the clinical teacher's strengths and areas for improvement as observed over the entire course of the placement, not just during one formal observation. A conference should be held with the clinical teacher to discuss the summative form and to sign it. The signed form is turned into the university supervisor and is kept in the clinical teacher's file at UTSA. Occasionally, clinical teachers and cooperating teachers have conflicts or misunderstandings about issues in the classroom. A basic understanding for UTSA clinical teachers is that clinical teachers are guests in the classrooms of their cooperating teachers, and therefore should follow the cooperating teacher's lead and suggestions. Communicating on a regular basis about issues will lessen the likelihood of conflict and will encourage professional dialogue. Clinical teachers and cooperating teachers are strongly encouraged to establish a specific weekly communication time and to make every effort to adhere to their established meeting time. If conflicts arise, and if a solution to the conflict cannot be agreed upon, please contact the university supervisor. The supervisor may suggest a three-way conference or meeting to help negotiate a solution to the problem. Because mentoring a clinical teacher is such an important task for cooperating teachers, please visit this interesting article about the qualities of a great mentor. Thank you for viewing this Cooperating Teacher Orientation Vodcast. We hope you have found it useful in answering questions you may have about our program. We ask that you and your clinical teacher now sign the Orientation Vodcast Affidavit, which can be found in your Cooperating Teacher folder. Your signature on the form verifies that you and your clinical teacher have viewed the Vodcast. The clinical teacher will turn in the signed affidavit to their university supervisor. Once again, thank you for your willingness to serve as a cooperating teacher for a clinical teacher. Please do not hesitate to contact the UTSA Clinical Teaching Office if you have questions or problems. We welcome your thoughts and ideas, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you.